Jambo, Karibu, everybody. Jambo, it's been a while and I have been busy doing so many other things. I taught a class this semester, in the summer semester, which was really intense, intercultural communications. And that kept me really busy because it intersected DEIB issue, diversity, equity, inclusion issues, from a Christian perspective, since I was teaching at a Christian school. It was very rich and impactful, I would say. So much has happened since I was here. I have added a new brand. I think I mentioned it the last time with my teas, but we have added merchandise and I am wearing one of them today. So we have these 4 messengers and I hope you go check out my store. Beside that, whew, what can we say about the Florida ruling where the school board decided that black people benefited from slavery? Oh Lord Jesus, what can I say about that too? So many things I can say about that. I'm laughing out of pain, not out of joy. So if we want to dive into that, my only thought I can give you at this moment is that growing up in a village in Africa, I know my mom is an amazing farmer and she never learned it from anybody that came from anywhere else. So to say that people from Africa that were brought onto the Americas as slaves were taught skills that benefited them, uh, it's beyond an insult, right? It's beyond an insult to those of us that grew up on the African continent and never had any exposure that would have led to learning some of the things we know from outsiders, to say the least. So saying that these people had no skills is absolutely ridiculous. People that can feed themselves, clothe themselves, even if they're clothing themselves with leaves on the tree, they have the cognitive ability to be able to take care of themselves and do things. So I don't know what skills are being talked about or that they think they learned, but this constant changing of history to fit people's emotions at a time is not helping us as a nation. And that's all I'm going to say on that topic before I shift onto the continent of Africa. I don't think I've ever done anything that is specific for Africa since I started the Jambo Dr. Kumbo podcast. We before the podcast, I used to host a forum called the Forum on the Forum on the Future of Education in Africa post COVID, and we did that with a couple of co-hosts for 2 years and before we ended that session. But it was a small part of what we call Africa Leads, or what I like to call Africa Leads. And because the topic today is centered on the African continent and leadership and the different events that are happening on the continent right now, I thought it would be appropriate to dig into that a little bit and bring in that topic. If everything works according to plan, I would like to have more voices from the African continent under the series of Africa Leads. I am so excited to just reflect on the different events that are going on in Africa and the different leaders and the coups and the revolutions. And this is such a rich topic and such exciting times for Africa. Not that I'm celebrating the coups, but to a certain degree, I am celebrating the revolution. I'm celebrating the fact that African minds are rising, African youth are rising and taking their destiny into their own hands. I am celebrating the fact that for a continent that values respect so much, we are starting to demand respect instead of expecting respect from everybody and even from our own people. All right, my thoughts on Niger. Niger is a country that
for as long as I can remember, everything that I was taught or heard or told about Niger is that it is the poorest country in the world. Today, it is quite fascinating to think that for a country that is extremely poor, a country like France, it's refusing to let go of the country. The argument is that if they leave the country, instability is going to ensue and it will destabilize the entire area or the entire region or destabilize the country. But the question is, if the people who are the people that live in this country want you out, shouldn't you just leave? If there is destabilization in a poor country and the poor country doesn't want you in their country, shouldn't you just leave them to their poverty? If you're really there to help the people and the people don't want your help, there is this say that you can force a horse to drink water. You can take them to the water, but you can force them to drink water. So if the people of Niger that are super poor do not want your help anymore, so why not just leave? I think they don't want to leave because, as we all know, there's uranium in the country, there's a lot of resources in the country, and they're taking things without paying fair price for those things, if they're paying anything at all. Which brings me to puppet leaders. Puppet leaders are the kind of leaders that will do whatever Western countries ask them to do, or any other country that they deem superior to them or ask them to do. And Africa has been known to have more puppet leaders than we can even count. The countries of Africa are struggling today because leaders didn't work for the interests of the people, but work for the interests of whoever is the colonial master. We can argue that colonization ended. But a lot of us know, if you were born and raised on the African continent, you know that colonization haven't ended. It just changed names. They might call it neocolonialism, but it is definitely economic colonization and economic slavery that is going on the continent of Africa. And the youth have had enough. That brings us to the youth. We on the African continent are the youngest growing population. By 2050, our youth will be the highest in the world, but at the same time the youngest in the world. And if these youth that are today are not looking to the future and saying, what are we going to be like another 30 years from today? What is it going to look like for us 30 years from today? Some of these leaders that we are saying have conducted coups are in their 30s. Seriously, 30s. That means another 30, they'll be 60. And we know that there are presidents in Africa that have been there for over 50 years. Some of them are even 90 years old. So, if this youth don't start thinking about what it will look like for them at 50, who is going to do it for them? We can rely on France and Britain and America. Most of these countries have been on the continent since the so-called decolonization, why is it that most of us live abroad in their countries? If they were there to make our countries better for us to be in, why is it that we are all in their countries? It's because we can't even survive in our own countries. We can't find work. We can go to school because there's unrest in our countries. And when we talk about unrest, look at what is happening in Niger. You can't always blame all the unrest on Western countries, but look at Niger. If Niger is unstable today, it's because France doesn't want to leave. Those people have been on strike for 3 days, sitting in front of the military base and asking them to leave, but they don't want to leave. Why is it that France doesn't want to leave? And if instability or riots or anything else results from the population being out there and demanding for France to leave and they're not leaving, then they will blame it on Africa and say, oh, Africa is unstable, Niger is unstable. These people need to be controlled by us. It's almost like, oh, let's put chains on their legs because they are not tameable. But you are the one that is forcing their hand. You're pushing them to the wall. And now they are pushing back. And if they push back just hard enough, you're going to use your weapons upon them, use your weapon on them, or use your weapon to destroy them, and then say, hey, look at these people, we need to go rescue them from themselves. Why is that? Anyway, back to the youth. The youth know that if they don't stand up, they have no future. We're going to go for another 50 years. We're going to go for another 50 years and nothing will change. It doesn't mean that the youth of the past didn't stand up. Many, many people have fought this battle and died. Many, many people have fought this battle. Look at Thomas Sankara. Where is Thomas Sankara today? He wanted us to stand up. He wanted Africa to be united and fight back and develop their own. Why didn't that happen? It is common knowledge that most of the coups in Africa and most of these African leaders like Sankara that were assassinated was with Western influence. Why? If Africa is so poor, why? Why are you assassinating their leaders that are calling for the people to stand up and develop their own countries? Why? Why do you want puppet leaders in place? Why do you want leaders that support your interests and not the interests of the people? And when the people leave and come into your country, they start to face rebukes from you. Why? Why? If you would let these countries, truly support these countries to be independent, do you think our youth will be dying in the desert trying to go to Europe? Do you think our youth will be dying in the ocean, crossing the same ocean that their ancestors were taken as slaves to cross? It is so painful when you hear that the children of Africa are dying trying to look for a better life somewhere else when their countries have the greatest resources that everybody around the world wants, but they are unable to leverage it for their own good. And they have to die and face discrimination and face disgust and face disrespect and face all kinds of negativity in other countries just because they are not even allowed or given the opportunity to make of their countries what it could be. So when the youth revolt, you say it's terrorism or terrorism. When the youth revolt, you say it's a coup. Instead of they're revolting, it's a revolution. A revolution that many are hoping is the beginning of the true independence of Africa, the true freedom of Africa, the freedom for Black people in Africa and maybe in the diaspora to have a voice of their own, to stand up for themselves, to trade fairly with each other, to be respected for their ability and not to be labeled as poor, as illiterate in whose civilization, illiterate in whose knowledge. So I do not think most of what is happening across Africa today are coups, especially those in the Sahel region. Those are revolutions. Those are not coups. Those are revolutions. Those are young people saying enough is enough. Those are people that are looking into the future to see if they can do something today that might make it better for the generations to come. When you look at Hofstede's cultural dimensions, one of the principles says that Africans are short-term people. Like we think in the short term, in the now. We do not have a long-term view of life. And that can be seen in the leaders from the 60s till today. These young leaders that are taking power right now through these revolutions are the ones that are trying to change the narrative and the perspective that Africans only think in the short term. Conditions might force Africans to think in the short term. But with this revolution, the hope is that Africans and the youth of Africa will start thinking in the long term and no more in the short term. That said, it doesn't mean that every coup is going to bring immediate results. I think there is an impatience that most Pan-Africanists are demonstrating when it comes to these coups or these revolutions. I personally think they're revolutions. I think there is an impatience of thinking that just because something happened today, there's going to be a change tomorrow. There might be small changes, like we've seen in the case of Gabon, where the people are actually saying, we have running water, we have running water. There always was running water. Somebody was controlling it. Now they have running water. But there's just some things that might not change for 10, 20, 15 years from now. And we're hoping that these leaders that are in place now will stay focused and work for the people and not revert to working for the Western countries that might have put them where they are or that they are claiming to be fighting against. That brings us to countries like Russia, China. We already know that the era of the United States, France, Belgium is quickly coming to an end unless these countries can find a new strategy and develop the respect of treating Africans with some dignity and treating Africans with equality in our humanity, instead of thinking that they can dictate to Africans. That might have happened to our ancestors, to our fathers and their forefathers, who were not knowledgeable intellectuals, not educated in the Western ways and culture. But this generation is different. Our grandfathers sent our fathers to school. They had basic education. Our fathers sent sent us to school, and most of us came out with masters, doctorates, and understand the culture. We understand the ways of the West. We understand how the West systems work. Unfortunately, some of us understand how our traditional cultures work. Some of us still understand and speak our traditional languages. And some of us can function with quite some efficiency in both cultures. So we are not the generation of our fathers. We are not the generation of our grandfathers. So treat us with some respect, because we have learned your ways in addition to our ways. Treat us with respect. Talk to us with respect. You cannot bully us anymore. You cannot intimidate us anymore. You cannot let us sign papers without understanding what they actually are saying anymore. You cannot underestimate us anymore. Please let that sink in. We are not the generation of our fathers or grandfathers or great-grandfathers. And this generation that is rising after us are definitely not going to be our generation. Our generation is the generation that is laying the foundation for the future generations. And this generation, the generation of Ibrahim Touare and his children's generation, are the generations that we hope will make the kind of change that the Pan-Africanists from the 60s fought and died for. It might seem hypocritical for me to be grinning when I think about these new revolutionary leaders and the future of their children and their children's children and the future of Africa while living in the West, working in the West, earning in the West, paying taxes in the West. It might seem hypocritical, but the battle that my generation have had to fight while living in the West might be very little, might not have been us dying like our fathers died for their beliefs. But if it is just us saying we believe in the future of Africa and stand with the leaders that truly want to change the continent, even if it's only our voice that is resounding in support for an Africa that is free from colonization, free from neo-colonization, free from imperialism, and can stand on its own and create its own form of democracy, and create its own form of leadership, and create its own form of education, and create its own form of businesses, and create its own identity in this globalized world. You might be pissed at a country like China and Russia. I find fault with them every day. But I also realize that they are the only ones that treated us a little bit with a little bit of fairness, that we're willing to develop in our own roads and do things within our countries, that defended people that were fighting for their independence, that promised a degree of fair trade. And it is up to our leaders to negotiate fair deals with these people. And it is up to our leaders, which I hope the young leaders will do, to start putting things, systems in place that will not allow Russia, China, or any other country that comes in now to exploit us. I understand that there are countries that have had China do business with them, and now China owns major infrastructures of the country. I hope the youth can get up and renegotiate those deals. I hope the youth that are taking power right now will renegotiate those deals. Every unfair deal needs to be renegotiated. And if the people that are supposed to be investors in the country refuse to renegotiate the deals, then maybe it's time for them to pack up and leave. It is not the time anymore for African countries to allow anyone to exploit them anymore, to allow anyone to make an unfair deal with them anymore. Maybe I'm speaking too soon. Maybe this will take another 10, 20 years. Maybe this is a thing for the future. And right now we just need people that actually think for the benefit of Africa. Maybe I'm thinking way ahead. But I hope that we start being long-term thinkers and not short-term thinkers. So, what's happening across the Sahel region are revolutions, are not coups. We are still waiting to see what Gabon does. So far, it seems to be going okay. Mais on verra. Le temps va dire. Si ça, c'est une révolution ou ça, c'est un coup d'État. Le temps va nous dire et on verra.
This is Jambo Dr. Akumbu podcast, and that's my reflection for today. Until next time, asante sana.